Listen, Jimmy, I've been right outside that door. I've been listening to that story you've been telling Officer Jones. It's time to cut the crap. I have right within this file, right here, of our investigation. That investigation shows us without any doubt that you killed your sister. You got on her bed, 11 p.m., Thursday night. You took a pillow and you suffocated her. It's all right here. There's only one question left in this investigation at this time, and that's why. Did you intend to do it, Jimmy? Or did just things get out of hand and you momentarily lost it? Because you don't seem like the kind of kid who would intend to do something like that. But every time, no, stop talking. It's my turn to talk. You'll get your turn. Every time you keep telling me these lies, Jimmy, every time, I'm starting to think I'm wrong about you. I'm starting to think maybe you did intend it. Maybe you're just a cold-blooded killer. Because it's one thing to get out of hand and have it get out of control and happen, but then to lie about it? That's real cold-blooded, Jimmy. But look, it's up to you. It's all right here. I can take that to the DA. I can take it to the judge, and I say, look, he won't cooperate. I don't know what to tell you. Do what you want. You can start telling me the truth, Jimmy. What happened Thursday night? I think she was probably teasing you. I think she was probably provoking you like I know she did. You just momentarily lost it. And I can get that. I can understand that. People can understand that. But you need to start telling me the truth. So I'm just going to have to assume I was wrong about you, and you meant to do it. So what is it, Jimmy? This is your last chance. Tell me right now what happened last Thursday night. Okay, I'm not going to talk to you that way the whole time. Let's take a deep breath. But I will say that in my career representing the wrongfully convicted, I have watched that scenario play out over and over again on videotape. And I've watched people confess, hearing stories just like that, hearing that monologue to crimes that we now know, DNA has proved it, other external evidence have proved it, that they absolutely did not do. And what you listened to me do, what you heard right there, there's absolutely nothing illegal about that, nothing per se illegal. In fact, it almost follows directly to how police are trained to interrogate suspects, to isolate them, cut off their denials. The jig is up. And then offer that sort of choice, although that's not really a choice at all. Two options, both legally culpable, both guilty options, but one so obviously more morally acceptable in this case. Did you intend to do it, Jimmy? Or were you provoked? Did it just get out of hand? And what's more, interrogators are trained to do that, whether it is an adult, seasoned felon who's been through the system before, or a kid, a 16, 15, 14, 13-year-old kid who's never been arrested. I want you to think about that last part for a second. I want you to take back to when you were 13 years old. And when I think back to when I was 13 years old, I immediately go to my bar mitzvah. I'm a Jewish kid from the suburbs, the rite of passage, 13 years old, the bar mitzvah. And I think about my bar mitzvah, I think about there's this huge party. My parents organize this big thing. They invite all their friends, some of my friends, and we have this big, huge party. And they insist that I have to give a speech thanking everyone for coming to this event. And I remember that speech. Still can picture myself up there just kind of mumbling and looking down and scared all the time. Hopefully I'm doing a little bit better 2.5 decades later right now. Well, time will tell. And I think about after that speech, the dancing starts and everyone's looking at me and this moment, I'm the guest of honor. Who's he going to pick to dance with first? There's this moment and I walk up to my secret crush, Hillary, and I sort of just mumble and grunt and hope and see what happens. And I picture myself and what I knew, or really what I didn't know, or when I was 13 years old. Think about it. Did I ever watch the TV news or read the newspaper or follow criminal blogs that didn't exist when I was that age? No, of course not. There was no way I had ever heard of, let alone trials, wrongful convictions, or false confessions. The thought never would have even occurred to me. And when I think about words and having their consequences, that words could have consequences that I wouldn't necessarily imagine back then, are you kidding me? Long-term thinking? I'll tell you another story. I'm a storyteller kind of guy. This one I'm 16, 17 years old. You already know about my secret crush. This one gets worse. Had my driver's license, and we had this long driveway up in my parents' house. They had this long driveway leading up to the garage, and this was the where before, if you can believe it, before automatic garage door openers, or at least I didn't have one in my car. So they had this passcode. So every time I would drive up my driveway, I would put the car in park, then I'd run up, I'd have to type in this little passcode, then run back to my car and drive into the garage and close the garage. Well, one day I was driving up, and I had this fleeting thought, 16 and a half, 17 years old. I'm like, I bet you I could keep the car and drive, jump out of the car, do the passcode, run back safely, put it in, and I'll be a hero. I'm the only one there. I'll be a hero. I'll park the car calmly in. And as I have this fleeting thought, I start doing it. What's wrong with me? I run up. I put the passcode in. I look back. The car's coming right at me. I dive into the bushes. Car crashes into the garage. Damage to the garage. Damage to the reputation with my parents. What was I thinking? I wasn't thinking. I certainly wasn't thinking about any consequences that could have happened for my action beyond just winning this game that only I was playing. And so and you may be thinking, what does this have to do with police interrogations, or what does it have to, Josh, you're certainly not the type of kid who would be talked to by the police. You're a suburban kid, you admit it. You're a Grinnell College graduate. And I'm here to tell you, 13 is 13. Teenagers are teenagers. And you know how I know I'm right? Because people a lot smarter than me have studied it. They've studied the brain, the biology of the brain. And there's a portion of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, they tell me. And the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that weighs consequences. It weighs decision-making. It helps you make logical decisions. It helps you think in the long term. And that portion of the brain during adolescence, during your teenage years, really up through your 20s and mid-20s, is still developing. It's still maturing. So for you college kids out there, your brains are not fully formed yet. You're still maturing in your brain. So I want you to think back to when you were 13. I bet you have a story like mine. I bet you have some stories, or I bet you can picture yourself how you were. And then I want you to think about learning that a loved one, a sibling, was dead. Your sister. You'd probably be sad. You'd probably be confused. And then I want you to think about within a couple days, actually maybe within a couple of hours, the police take you and they put you in a room and they tell you that story, that little monologue that I told you in the beginning. You're alone in that room. Police officer, he may have a gun on him in his holster, maybe twice your size. And every time you're trying to tell them that you didn't do it, not only do they accuse you of lying, but that lying is evidence of you're a lost soul and you're a horrible human being. And the story of this, the title of this talk is, Why Would a Kid Falsely Confess to a Crime? But when you really start to think about it in that context, it doesn't become quite as hard to imagine to me. I mean, think back to that monologue. What are they saying? They're saying it's not really that bad. They're at least implying, inferring that there's a reason it might have happened. It might not be as bad as you think. You lost it. I can understand that. They're not really even offering you a choice at all. It's all right here. There's not an option at all. You either did it, and it's a lesser of two evils. And when I think back, it's not hard to imagine why you would give in, because who's talking to you? Authority figures. I tell you, I was scared all the time. I was scared of my parents. I certainly would be scared of police officers, and you're told to trust them, most of us, when you're a kid. Who do you go to when you're in trouble? And they're telling you it's for your own good to admit to this crime. You start telling them, maybe it is for my own good. Maybe you need to do it, and I'll work it out later. And when you reach that breaking point, when you make the decision to opt in and say, I will agree with what you're saying, and everybody has their breaking point, it's really not hard for me to imagine how you come up with that story, how you falsely confess and tell an actual narrative about something that happened that you did not do and you know nothing about. I mean, it's all there. When it happened, Thursday night, 11 p.m., how it happened, you suffocated her with a pillow. where it happened, in her room, in her bed, and why it happened. She provoked you, teased you, you lost it. And that right there is the confession. You repeat that one time in there, police officers write it down, you sign your name, and that essentially seals your fate. A signature from a 13-year-old that would be legally unenforceable on an Apple iPhone contract essentially seals your fate. See, a false confession, and that's exactly what that piece of paper is with your signature, contaminates the entire criminal justice process. Police officers don't understand that anyone would falsely confess, and when they get a confession, they stop investigating. Or if they do, the entire investigation is focused on corroborating that confession they just took. And police aren't alone. The general public doesn't understand how someone would falsely confess. I'm a storyteller guy, but I'm going to share with you one statistic. I'm not a big statistic guy, but this is my favorite one. A 2004 study of false confessions. This is a database of a group of false confessions that everyone acknowledges are false. External evidence proves it. These people have been certified false confessors, essentially. But before they were certified, a lot of them went to trial. They were prosecuted, and 4/5 of those false confessions who went to trial were convicted beyond a reasonable doubt by juries, by judges. Lies, made-up stories. They had nothing to do with it, and they were convicted beyond a reasonable doubt, 80%. And my work at the Center on Wrongful Convictions of Youth, Northwestern Law School, is about partially revisiting some of those cases, and I've gotten a chance to work on them. I'm going to tell you about one of them. And it's the case of, my client here is Terrell Swift, and he's part of a group called the Englewood Four. And when I met Terrell, it was in 2010, and he's about my age, and he looks something like this. But in March 1995, he was 17 years old. And so were four other defendants who came to be. And all of them confessed during police interrogations. 5 of them in total. They were all 15 to 18 years old, confessed to a rape and murder of a 30-year-old woman. And when I got the case, we looked back at it, we tested the DNA that we found, and it found that they were entirely innocent. They've all been certified innocent by the state of Illinois. And it's a fascinating case. It's a great example because out of those 5, 4 of them went to trial. All 5 of them went to trial. 4 of them were convicted. There's your 80%. And it's a fascinating case because it shows the dire consequences of false confessions. Because after they took the confessions, the police stopped investigating. They didn't look for the true perpetrators. And what we learned from the DNA evidence is who that actual true perpetrator was. And what we learned in 2010, 2011, was that it was actually a serial predator in 1995, a serial killer. We learned that by March 1995, actually months earlier when the body was discovered, this serial killer had been arrested 60 times in the city of Chicago. He had been arrested 4 reported times of violent sexual assaults of women just like the victim in this case. And then when the confessions came and they stopped investigating and he was still on the street 7 months after he murdered the woman in this case, he did it again. He murdered another woman, raped and murdered her. And 2 years later, still not caught, he did it again, this time a pregnant woman. If the investigation had not relied on false confessions alone, on interrogations of kids alone, and we had investigated correctly, 2 women would still be alive today. Of course, 60 years of false imprisonment, wrongful imprisonment for the Englewood Four as well. The work we do litigating these claims, it's important, it's emotional, it's inspiring work that we do, but I will tell you it's not the most important work we do. The most important work we do is trying to build back in the transparency into this process, trying to tell police that there's a better way to do this. Just earlier this week, I was in Altoona, Iowa, talking to over 100 law enforcement investigators, sex crime investigators, telling them many of the same things I'm telling you here, telling them that this can happen to you. You need to record all of your interrogations. I tell you, I watch these on recordings, but many, many states, many, many jurisdictions, many, many police officers do not record what they're doing in an era where everything is recorded. there's no transparency to this process. We tell them you have to do better. There's other better ways of doing this. But even more important than the police officers is telling you, the jurors, the general public, that this can happen and how it happens. So I will leave you with this. The next time you read your own news report, or listen to TV news, and they tell a story of a heinous crime and they caught the criminal, and they know they caught him because he admitted it to the police, take some pause. Remember how that confession was actually extracted, and allow yourself the benefit of some skepticism. Thank you.